May 25th, 2020. When you first hear that date, you may not think much about it, but many around the world will never forget the name George Floyd. It's the day he was killed, sparking protests, immense grief, anger, and calls for change. And for some of us, though, we saw more than just George Floyd. We saw ourselves. In this 41 Action News exclusive, we brought together 6 black men, including myself, to talk about that day, our own mental health, and how we move forward from here. Walk me through that day 1 year ago when you guys heard about what happened, when you guys saw the video, and just what was going on in your mind and how you proceeded.
I guess I'll start off. Being a superintendent of a school district where we serve 100% free and reduced lunch children, and many of them living in extreme poverty, I think about just the way that this system has been designed in the United States. I speak a lot against social injustice issues, racial inequities, gender inequities, socioeconomic status inequities that are inherently built into the system. So we've seen that pattern play out time and time again. And I think as a leader of a system where kids are seeing this and they're having to go back and ask, why does this continue to happen? I mean, we had to speak out against it. And we took that approach that in our school district, we will no longer condone those kind of practices and sit and stand silent. And I think since that incident, we've been even more vocal about a lot of the social injustices that tend to plague, in particular, poor children of color that are often deprived because of how the system has been designed in this country.
Yeah, I think for me, when that took place, I immediately got an onslaught of, Pastor, what's going on? Why does this happen? And because of what I do, the questions I was getting was always centered around not why does this keep happening? Mine was, why does God keep letting this happen? And so I would have to answer those hard questions and have that dialogue and different things like that. So with that came a lot of, I'm already dealing with my own emotions because of the situation and already dealing with my own, perceptions because of the situation, but then having to carry that weight and those hard questions from my congregants was difficult. So I'll never forget that.
How do you answer those questions?
With me, the answer that I gave is that God has already dealt with it. And so here's how. Me being a pastor and preaching the gospel, my mentality and what we teach is that Jesus came. Jesus bore upon himself the sins of the world, all the racial injustice, all of the social economic situations and different things like that. He bore that on himself on the cross and was buried with that and resurrected to victory. And so I'm letting people know that God has not ignored that, but God has already dealt with that. And our responsibility is to put faith and trust in that, knowing that all things will be made right in the end.
I needed that because for me, I was frozen because I was already emotional over Kobe's passing. Then it was emotional over COVID. And then I get to the point where I'm tired of seeing people that look like me being killed. Right? I was pissed, I was emotional, I was frozen, I was disconnected, and I saw my kids looking at me, right? And it's like, how do you handle all of those emotions but still filtered in the way Pastor just filtered in a way that spiritually it makes sense, and then how does it make sense through like mental therapy, right? And it was at a time where I was in LA when it happened, so I couldn't get to a therapist. I've been going to therapy for since 2010. So I couldn't get to my therapist because everything was shut down. And then when I went and talked to my therapist, I'm explaining how it is to be a black man in America, but I'm talking to a white therapist. So all the complex challenges of how do we seek resolution? How do we seek resources? All of that for me the world for me became a standstill. And I'm living in an all white neighborhood, right? So now when I go outside, I grew up all up and down Parallel. So now when I go outside, it's like I'm right back to where I started. Now the traps done changed. Now I got to be super aware. I'm taking walks through my neighborhood with my cell phone. And the cell phone can tell our story and it can give us our narrative, but it won't save us. I just use it so something happened, maybe someone can see what really happened. And then as Officer Williams know, I grew up with police all in my neighborhood. So it's these ain't the same police I see on TV. So then you become more confused, like, how did I get lucky to play pickup with police officers in my neighborhood, but now I'm seeing police officers on TV being extremely different?
How do we explain that? And I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of all officers,
Right.
ever.
Right.
But how do we explain that?
Well, I'm gonna tell you how I felt watching the video. And my first thought was, wow, he just set us back 50, 60 years just in his actions. Because the reason I became a policeman is to change that, because I saw how things were going. I grew up in Juniper Gardens, the housing projects here, and I seen the way things were. Who was patrolling my neighborhood? It's almost like the boss was patrolling my neighborhood, and I wanted to change that. I needed a face that looked like me. I wanted a face that kind of looked like me patrolling my neighborhood. So when I first seen that, I kept saying, "Get up, man! Get up!" It was almost like I was telling him to. I wanted to. Just tell him to get up, and it crushed me, because I said, he just set us back years, because we were trying to make steps because of everything that's been happening. There's so many good police officers out here that are trying to do a good job and wanting to do a good job, and one person could set us back that far, and they'll punish the institution instead of that individual for a decision that he made wearing that uniform. They'll punish the whole uniform, and it just broke my heart.
You know, in the past, I've done a few conversations like this in a barbershop. We all know the mystique. We all know the importance of the barbershop. It's a place where no conversation is off limits. We can talk about almost anything and about anyone without any prejudice, without any judgment. I say all that to say we oftentimes don't talk about the importance of mental health. You mentioned going to therapy, going to counseling. That's something that we don't discuss, especially folks who look just like us here in this circle. Why is that? And you think that's changed at all since these turn of events that happened?
I think there's a lot of reasons why people that look like us don't typically go to therapy. You can look historically with the way that just how psychology, how therapy was weaponized against people of color to make some sort of point that we were less than, that we were. It was good for us to be subjugated, and they twisted science and psychology to make it say that. And so there's that history. And there's also the history when you talked about going to a therapist and trying to navigate everything that was happening with a white therapist, and having these complex issues, but not being able to maybe not being able to connect with that therapist. This is the story we have so often with people of color. So many times we find that people of color will come to therapy, but because they're not able to connect with the individual, the therapist, and this is on the therapist for not finding ways to connect with people of color, they end up leaving. And this begins to be the sort of the story and narrative, and the desire to go to therapy is diminished. I think what has happened so often, because the folks that are writing these different theories or putting out different techniques for therapy are doing this research primarily on white, middle-aged individuals, and then they try and copy and paste that therapy with people like us, and it doesn't work. And it, more than it doesn't work, it does damage. It does so much damage to us. We see this and we don't desire to go to therapy, and it's terrible because we can benefit so much from therapy. There's so much to gain, especially with everything that's happening now, from being in therapy, being able to sit there in a space that doesn't have any judgment, and be able to just work through these things. I think we do a disservice to ourselves not to seek these services because they can be so helpful.
What about people who are worried about that judgment? Talk to them. A lot of them will be watching this story when it airs, and so many people think, "Oh man, that's soft."
And that's another perception that people have of therapy. Well, first we can go back to this American idea, and it's terrible from my perspective. That you are your own person, this individual. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You don't need anybody else. It's just you. It's not true. It's not true. Even the people that are successful in life, they talk about having these, and they might diminish it, but having these support systems to get them to where they could be successful. It's the same way with therapy. Everyone can benefit from therapy. Going to therapy does not in any way mean that you're weak or soft, or There's something wrong with you because you couldn't do it yourself. In fact, we're all built for that community. You think about it even within our community, the barbershop. You come here for the barbershop, not just for the cut, but for the conversation, for the relationships you build. It's that community aspect. In service, there's a reason we have corporate worship, because again, the community. Aside from everything else, we thrive on having that space, that community. And when we don't have it, we suffer. So we have to change our thinking about therapy. It's not so much that you go to therapy because you've tried everything else yourself and you failed, but no, you go to therapy because how can I describe it? Since we're in a barbershop, you wouldn't come to a barbershop just once every year, just to, only when your hair is unruly or whatever the case may be. You'll come every so often, every 2 weeks or whatever the case may be, to keep things in shape, to continue to make sure that everything is in line. The therapy is sort of that way as well.
A lot of kids want to be hoopers, right? And so to make it to the highest level, you got to have as many resources as possible. And he's talking about mental therapy resources. I'm talking about athleticism. You got to eat right, you got to train right, you got to sacrifice your body as far as not staying out late getting your sleep, and you have to lift weights, and you have to get a shooting coach and a dribbling skills coach. That's what mental therapy is. It's a skills coach for your mind, and I do EMDR, so my therapy is super intense, right? So we don't realize when we face traumas, our brain freezes, and when it freezes, the left and right brain can't send signals. If that can't send the signals back and forth, you become literally frozen and you disconnect. And what does that do? That disrupts your home. It disrupts you as a parent. It disrupts you as a worker or professional. Disrupts your dreams. I wish I would have been in therapy in high school. I wish I would have been in therapy in middle school. When I went to Coronado and it was a shooting in the cafeteria on a Wednesday and they said come back on Monday, like nothing ever happened. Like I wish I could have had that moment to express myself. So when we talk about our community, we are told to be tough and be strong. And I think that comes from a generation of people who knew what we were about to face as young black men in this world. They was preparing us for the world. But now we have to prepare our children differently. We have to give them the resources and tell them it's not all about being strong. Meek is strength, right? And that's biblically, right? Meek is strength. I grew up in A Street, so meek is strength, right? So you got to understand, like, it's okay, like, every good NBA player, and I've been around the best, they find their weakness every summer and find a resource to work on it. And you have to see yourself as that player in life too. Find your weakness, work on it, get the resources and grow. And the question is, when we come from neighborhoods like this, where's the funding?
It's real. So let me chime in on that, because before the pandemic hit, we have been focusing on how do we address the social and emotional deficits, because to your point, they often become impediments to these kids achieving their full academic goals in life. And so we ended up getting we wrote for a grant. It was a $3.2 million Victim of Crime Act grant. And with that grant, we were able to we tripled our trauma-sensitive clinicians. And it's not just to address the mental health needs of our kids, we're utilizing it to help with their parents. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday I was visiting schools, and I visited 6 schools yesterday, and I end my day at Central High School. So 3 weeks ago, there was this kid that was shot, I guess in the hotel across from the Chiefs Stadium. 14-year-old, I guess going on 15. The mother is there when I got to the school, so our family clinician, family therapist asked me to come out to talk to her. So, she's out there, she's crying. She had come to our school to receive therapeutic services from that family therapist because of how she's trying to cope with the fact that her 14-year-old ninth grader, she can't ever talk to him again. She can't ever hug him again. And I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I don't even know what to say. I've lived through this kind of stuff. But it's just hard to see a parent grieving like that. And so we have taken that approach that if we don't address the social and emotional distress and we help to eliminate this embarrassment factor that you're weak for some odd reason, because you're getting these kind of services, and we're not going to ever get out of the hole that we're in, you know, just from a performance standpoint, but even helping these kids to break that cycle of repetitive poverty that we're often stuck in because of not being able to deal with the coping mechanisms that you two just talked about, that we have to help them with.
You know, it's crazy. You mentioned oftentimes we are frozen. And as somebody who's been doing television news for almost 20 years, this is so repetitious sometimes. And for me, as a black man who's on the anchor desk, I found myself as frozen at times to answer that question myself, the same question I posed to you guys. I want to say before 2020, I can count on my fingers the number of times I've been brought to tears from doing a news story. You become desensitized, right? After 2020, I think that number has doubled, tripled. I need toes. You know, it's and other digits to count. Because these people oftentimes look like me, and it becomes taxing to do it over and over and over. And because of that, I had a buddy who I texted, who I know was seeking counseling, and a couple weeks ago I asked for their contact. I haven't gone yet, but I think I need it. It's therapeutic. It's something that really has me reevaluating things. And also, even from the construct of a journalist, how we tell some of these stories. You look at some of the narratives that came out right after George Floyd's death. Most recently, that news release came out that was issued hours after his death that talked about he was combative, he did this, he did that, he did it. You know, that 9 minutes, 26 seconds, so otherwise, right? So I think also from my job perspective, and this is a question I have for you guys, but from my job perspective, it challenges us to challenge what we're being told. Sometimes you see this narrative on a piece of paper come to you from the direction of a police officer, from the voice of somebody who's in this other position, knowing that there are oftentimes two or more sides to the story. So it really challenges us as journalists to ask those probing questions to get to the bottom of things, which is something I hope most newsrooms like ours are really trying to do that. That's one way we're trying to fight this, one way we're trying to address this, one way we're trying to heal and trying to, I don't want to say slap a Band-Aid on this, but one way we're trying to mend some of these wounds. What are you guys doing in your respective communities, respective industries, to try and heal, to try and mend some of these wounds that people in your congregation, people who come across you, some of your clients, your students, athletes, mentors, young kids, people want to be police officers. How are we helping to heal?
Really just educating them, teaching them the truth. As far as in the position, my biggest thing is to create an interest in getting people interested in law enforcement that looks like the neighborhoods that they patrol. For so long we have said negative about law enforcement that we don't have any really people of color interested in law enforcement. So the cycle will continue. We can jump up and down and say, we need to do this, we need to do that. But now while we got their ear, it's a chance for us to get people hired. So because it's going to take time for the system to change. And so when the system do change, you want to have people in position to take over that, to be in place to take those positions. So one thing I'm doing is I'm trying to renew people's mind about law enforcement, about the interest in law enforcement. I'm trying to be an advocate for getting people to get involved in it, so we can change the system. You have to be a part of it, I believe, to change it. So that's one thing that I'm really trying to get involved in more and more, is changing the mind of people about law enforcement, especially black law enforcement officers. I mean, we need more people of color in the profession.
I had a conversation late last year with a sergeant over in KCPD, a female sergeant. At the time, she was one of like 8 female sergeants, black sergeants in KCPD out of like 200 sergeants in the whole department. And I asked her if trust eroded. Fast forward to about a week ago, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who said, we've oftentimes heard about the bad apples. It's just a few bad apples. Well, my friend said, what if it's not the bad apples? What if it's the soil? I don't care what kind of flower or fruit you got, but if you got bad soil, it ain't gonna grow. What would you say to that, to somebody who believes that?
It's tough because in order to make it flourish, you're gonna have to change the soil. and it's going to take time for something to grow in new soil. So if you're going to change the soil, I think that's what I would tell them. I mean, when I was saying you have to have people there in position, ready to take over, that's what I mean, like the planting of the seed, the soil. You're going to change the soil, you plant new seed, and then it can grow. I mean, that's it, man. I'm sorry I don't have no something that's right off the top, but I'm just like, my biggest thing really has been, you don't know how many times I've showed up on calls and people were just like, I'm happy to see you. You know, black people in the community or people in the community. I'm happy to see somebody who looked like me showing up that understands where I'm coming from, that understands this whole situation. Like I said, growing up in the neighborhood I grew up in, I saw a lot of stuff. So it made me more passionate about helping people in this community because I felt like I was a part of it. I couldn't treat nobody bad in this neighborhood because I grew up in this neighborhood. I went to school in this neighborhood. I had my aunties live over here. So it was the sweat equity. It was a sense of belonging. So I felt like I belonged to this community. So I felt like I needed to protect it. And that's what I done.
One thing I love about this, I remember when me and Earl first talked, and then we talked again, and you mentioned him, and you mentioned the trust that has been built over time and how he helped mold you as a police officer. Where are these conversations at today? Where are these relationships at today?
And maybe that's it, because he grew up in the neighborhood. How many police officers that work in this city are not from this city? Are not from these neighborhoods, or from like somewhere so far out, we don't even know how to get there. And I think that's maybe the problem. Like, for me, growing up, if he pulled up on me, I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid of him telling my mama. You know what I mean? Like, take me to jail. Like, don't tell my mama. And that's a different fear when you can call your mama, call your grandma, call your daddy, call your sibling. Like, that's a different type of fear. And I not only saw him in uniform, I saw him playing pickup. I saw him in my backyard. I would go play pickup at Bethany Rec, man, in the summertime. I was a gym rat. I would be there in the morning with the police officers, mostly all black. I would come back and play lunchtime with the federal judges and play with the street dudes at night. I just wanted to hoop. And when you get to hooping and playing, you develop these relationships that are competitive, but it's also respectful. And then people become a part of your journey. People want to see you succeed. So whether I messed up or I did right, they was always there to tell me how to do better. And, you know, we talk about the system changing, and I don't think anyone really has that answer. What does that look like? But I think we got to have, no matter if the system change or not, it's not going to be any change if you don't have black people in position of power. You can change any system, but if they can't hire, hold accountable, and fire and not promote it, what's the difference? And it's not that we need to be there because we're qualified too. But it's scientific fact that people hire people that look like themselves and promote people they see themselves in. So we have to change all of it, including the soil.
So how do we help people in our respective fields and people that we come across regularly navigate these waters, deal with this trauma?
I think for me, what we've tried to do is, and this young man, this brother said it perfectly, is we've tried to encourage community, right? Like in Proverbs it says, in a multitude of counsel, there's safety. So we've tried to encourage community. We've tried to encourage relationships where people can sit with people and talk about their experiences and begin to help. One thing that I've learned is I can feel something and not even know how to feel what I'm feeling. And so I've had to learn through community how to process my emotions, how to know what I'm feeling, because my go-to emotion is anger. Like, even if I'm sad, I'd rather be mad. When I'm hungry, I'd rather, you know what I mean? And so just sitting with people of like-minded and sitting with people with shared experiences and talking and discussing and iron sharpening iron, and you having a different perspective and I'm having a different perspective, and maybe we clash a little bit, but in the end we come to some sort of conclusion and we can agree to disagree, and I'm processing these rough emotions. You see what I'm saying? With other people. And so that's what we've tried to do. Really just talk it out. Like, not And one thing that I've done is I've recently gotten into therapy. Just being in a position of leadership and a lot of time being scrutinized and hyper criticized, and you know what I'm saying, and feeling like you can't do nothing right, and then when you do something, it's not the right decision, and these people are mad, and I learned that has an effect on your soul. Like my soul was getting sick, you know what I'm saying? Because I don't believe that we were created to be that hyper criticized and scrutinized, you know what I'm saying? And so it's just sitting and processing my emotions before they're raw, and me getting up speaking to people in leadership, and so just leading by example in that. And so we've seen positives because of this, even the George Floyd situation and all the stuff that's happened in 2020. A lot of negative is taking place, but we've seen a lot of positives. And one of the positives that we've seen are people are finally opening up, and people are finally talking, and people are finally going to get support. Notice I said support and not help, because that's how I communicated to a lot of the men in our church. I liken it to even lifting weights. Like when you bench pressing, like that's not necessarily just help, that's support, right? That spotter behind you is supporting you in lifting that thing that you need to lift in order to get the strength that you want to get. And so oftentimes the strength is on the other side of the support you get. And so that's what we've been communicating, and we've been seeing that flourish and help a lot of people in our congregation.
Pastor, toxic stress is real.
Yep.
When you are in these types of leadership positions. And to your point, it don't matter what entity you work in, when you are at the helm of leading an organization, every dart and bullet is coming your way. It comes with the territory, and the key is, to your point, getting that help. I have therapy sessions too, and I started, I'll probably say, about a year after I got here, I realized I'm gonna need a lot of therapy in this role, right? But I think to going back to Kevin's question, how do we do what our officer did down here for Earl, and what you talked about? Kevin is actually one of our mentors in our MOCA program, Men of Honor, Color, and Ambition. And then I know when we do our Saturday opportunities, before COVID, we'd have kids in from all around the district coming in. We just had a couple of rules. Don't come in here cussing, don't come in here fighting. And we're gonna open this gym up, and if we gotta have multiple courts going, but we in there with him, we got officers in there, we got alumni that graduated from different schools, and it was a wonderful way, to feed into these kids and to be a little bit vulnerable. And I think we lost a lot of that with this pandemic. That's where a lot of the social and emotional distress has completely debilitated our community, and it all surfaced to the top after the first month of going through this whole COVID piece, and then you couple that with Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and what happened with George Floyd, and it's just, and we really haven't been able to cope with all of that still. We're just now starting to open up a little bit. So we're gonna need each other more than ever, as we are getting to a position where we're opening up more and gonna have to provide more opportunities to do this kind of fellowshipping.
People come to you often because they need you to be that spotter, as Pastor said. How do you navigate this, and how do you help them and help yourself in the process?
I really like that question, because I think a lot of people have this misconception of what therapy is. They think that they come into therapy, and a lot of times when people come into therapy for the first time, they're expecting me as a therapist or a counselor to tell them everything that's wrong with their life, or to give them this play-by-play of what they need to do, how they need to fix their life. And therapy is not like that at all. A good therapist is exactly like that as a spotter. We're meant to be, from my perception, we're meant to be, there's some sort of like sounding board where you can come in and talk freely. You can unload and talk about, okay, these are the areas, these are the issues I'm having. These are the areas I'm needing support. How can we work together? It's this collective thing. How can we work together to shore up those areas that I'm needing some support in? Specifically about this and the trauma and re-trauma of seeing everything that's happening socially, with injustice and whatnot. One of the things that I do with my clients, I make sure to do, is to validate feelings about all of this. because so often it happens for people of color, especially living in primarily white spaces, is having to hide and to internalize and to keep hidden and to keep quiet about all these things that are happening because they don't feel like they're in a space that's comfortable enough to be able to share. They don't feel like if they share that they'll have, there'll be any reciprocity, that people will understand, that people will feel any sort of empathy towards them. So they just keep it internal. And that stuff weighs you down.
In a year, and I want each of you to tell me, to answer this for me, but in a year of a pandemic, Jesus, in a year of racial unrest, in a year of political unrest, what has been your biggest success, you see it, when it comes to your mental health? And what's been your biggest challenge? And I think I'll start to my left.
So from a mental health standpoint, probably the challenge, I'll start with the challenge first, is just trying to properly identify kids who really do need that kind of support. I mean, it's like you got to do a lot of probing to get them to tell us, for some of these kids, that they really are struggling. And I think that's an area that I know we just have to continue to work on, just being able to identify them early. But what has worked about it is, because of the focus that we had already coming into the pandemic, the significant amount of support that we have now with partnerships throughout the community, whether it's Center for Conflict Resolution or Mattie Rhodes or the telehealth platform that we're utilizing to kind of reach families in a very distant manner. We have been able to touch a significant amount of more of community and students, and we do a public update on that probably about 2 times a year, where we let people know it's available for anybody to see how we are addressing the mental health needs within our school district. So we have gotten better, but we still have work to do around being able to get kids to be a little bit more vulnerable when they're going through some of that stuff.
Sounds like a challenge and a success.
It is.
Reaching out
Yeah,
to the
well,
kids, but
we're definitely much better now because of the pandemic. It forced us to. There's a lot of things I tell everybody in here. I feel like we were playing school in some cases, and that pandemic made it real. Like, you wasn't as all digitally proficient as we thought we were once that pandemic hit. We're like, oh, we really was playing at this. So it got real fast. And I think coming out on the other end, we're going to be much more ambidextrous, and we're going to be much more responsive because of this pandemic.
What do you think has been your biggest challenge and biggest success?
I think the biggest challenge has been doing everything I can not to be numb, not to be numbed by everything that's happening. Because whether it's through conversations in academia or as my job, work as a therapist, or even just being a black man in the U.S., I'm faced with this over and over and over and over again. You see the patterns. So the biggest challenge for me has been doing what I can to prevent myself from being numb to all of it. And I would say the biggest success is, and in the same vein, just finding this renewed motivation. I'm at the tail end of my degree, thank God. I'm just ready to be done. I'm ready to be out there because I know the importance of having more folks. We talked about having people in the spaces, like people of color in the spaces, to make changes. There's a shortage of black male therapists. There's a shortage of black therapists, period, but there's a shortage of black male therapists. I need to be out there. And so this, if anything, has provided more motivation for me to just be out there. And even added to that, I'm an immigrant from Nigeria. I'm a DACA recipient. So there's that as well, seeing how the DACA individuals, there's trauma associated with that as well. I'm just ready to be out there. So motivation has come as a result of this, and I'm really thankful for it.
I think for me, I ain't gonna lie, I'm proud of myself, man. I am. I'm proud of myself, and here's why I say that. I have here recently, this pandemic and all the social unrest, political craziness that's taken place, and even some personal things in my life has taught me not to avoid pain, but to lean into it. I think one of the most devastating event that happened in my life was in January 21st, 2005. Both my mother and father were killed in a plane crash. And from that day forward, I would duck pain. I didn't want to feel it. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to touch it. But I think through getting healthy and going through therapy, I've learned to lean into pain, and I've learned to look at myself as not just a black man. You see what I'm saying? I'm more than that. I'm a human. You know what I'm saying? And so the stuff I feel is not just black man stuff, it's human stuff. And I'm dealing with stuff that humans deal with. And I had to really embrace that and really say, you know what, man? Like, you're a man, you're a dog, you're good at your job, you know what I'm saying? You out here, but I had to know, like, I had to also embrace the fact that I am a freaking human. And I hurt. And there's stuff that I deal with, and I cry, and I'm sad. And embracing that has been a success this year. And the challenge is embracing that. So the same thing that's been a success to me is also the challenge, because sometimes I just don't want to deal with it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to touch it. I want to avoid it. I want to ignore it. But I'm working on that. So my success and challenge is the same thing as pain. It's that P word, man. It's pain. It's just like leaning into it, talking about it, processing it, and then teaching others out of it is something that's a success and
I'm kind of one and the same, like both of these two brothers here. It's my success and the struggles been kind of like I got motivated on renewing people's, like I said, renewing people's mind on good. I mean, I just it's been so negative the last couple of years that just encouraging people to be strong and stand up and believe in the good in everything, man. Just getting, I've been, getting closer in my walk with God, in Christ, and just really talking with my pastor about the things that I've seen in the 30 years that I was in law enforcement. Because we forget, we were talking about mental awareness. You can imagine what I've gone through, every range of emotions in a 4-hour period. So just really learning to cope with what I've gone through in my years, and then to think that there is change, and then to see everything that has happened in these last couple of years, like I was saying earlier, how it set us back. So just knowing that we can get past this, we just got to change some things, but just kind of encouraging people to get involved, get motivated, participate in the political process, know your school board members. I mean, I've been more into getting people involved so we can make this change. So it's like I said, it's been challenging, but it's been rewarding because it's kind of motivate me. Because with me, like I said, with me being from the community, I kind of say some people kind of believe it. They trust in my word. Because I walk the walk. So that's been mine, just trying to encourage people.
I think people fail to realize, especially as a member of law enforcement, that you see people in their highest of highs, but you also see them in their lowest of lows, oftentimes.
And they don't consider the fact that not only am I dealing with your worst, sometimes I come to work with my worst. I wife and kids and everything, I still have those same problems that they have, So they sometimes forget that my mental health is, I need to check on my mental health as well.
I mean, for me, I know I have a lot of responsibility, and I had it since I was young. My whole life, I've been rewarded on playing through pain, like Pastor talked about. If you can't play through pain, all y'all gonna tweet about it. Like, you know what I'm saying? Oh, taking the night off, don't want to play on a back-to-back. That's for real. So I learned my whole life, I played through broken bones. I had my best game in college when I tore my retina. Retina surgery the next day, played the next game 2 days later. My whole life, I've been like, that's how I got to where I'm at. Like, just locking in, and it's the fight, it's the flight, it's the freeze, and it's the fourth F, right? That's the process that people go through, right? So for me, that's always been my challenge, is like, I don't have to be an NBA player outside of the court. I can accept when I'm hurt. I can accept when I'm emotional. And instead of me fighting you with it, now I just be like, yo, you really hurt me when you said that. Like, that really hurt my feelings. I don't care what you think I am, or money don't make you a certain status where you disconnected from everything, or you have this superhuman strength. We're all the same. Like, I wake up and I sleep, I eat, I wake up, I dream the same as everyone else, right? My addiction was just basketball. That was truly and still is my addiction. And I think my success is the fact that I'm using my voice. I'm unapologetic. I talk about everything I've ever experienced in life, from, systemic racism to, trying to handle success at such a young age, how to be a father, how to be a significant other, how to be a better person in the community. And I don't forget where I come from. And between the 6th grade and my 12th grade year, I moved 12 times. I don't forget where I come from. So when people think that it's you got these boxes you check off, and that's how you get to where that's false. You have a vision, you have a dream, and you have a destination. And the rest is just a journey. And through the journey, you're going to be hit with darkness. And it's up to you to choose that light. You're going to have emotions. You're going to be angry. You're going to be upset. But how long are you going to hold it for? Right? It's like a basketball game. They say next play, next play, next play. You got to let it go. You got to choose that light. And then you'll get to a destination that you think, oh, I made it. And you're like, I can't stay here because life keeps going. So now what's my next journey? And we all know when you get to a peak, you got to go what? Down. And back through the valley and back up another mountain. And you want it to be higher than the last mountain. So that is my success, telling these young kids, like, it's constant, man. Like Nipsey said, the marathon continues. Like, Coach Wooden says, be quick, don't hurry. I always say, take a minute, be mindful, and understand how you feel. Look in the morning. Every morning you got to look in that mirror. And whether you apologize to yourself or you talk to yourself, you better talk to yourself and tell yourself who you are. Because if you don't, the world will. And when they tell you, it ain't nice. So tell yourself who you are every morning. The world is always late in recognizing your greatness. And that is the platform I try to live on.
I think my biggest challenge and my biggest success is me trying to come into my own, me being unapologetic as to who I am and comfortable. Take my profession, for example. You go back 20, 30 years ago, you'd see the stoic person on the anchor desk with no emotion whatsoever. It's fine to have emotion. And I try every day to show that emotion, especially when it's very warranted, whether I'm happy, sad, confused even, And also, there used to be a time where I think back to 2003, Kevin, when I first started in the news business, and there were conversations in the newsroom that were very unnerving, maybe very uncomfortable, or things that just I didn't see right. I think now I've come into my own to be able to use my platform, use my mouthpiece. I've been here in Kansas City for almost 5 years now. I remember going back to 2016, we had something that we called Kind KC. I know Brex remember that. We had with this little campaign, we had Kind KC. We started with a little montage about being kind to each other, woo-de-woo. And in that montage, one thing that stood out right away, and I don't think it was intentional, but still, it stood out right away. In this montage, all of the victims, all of the criminals looked like me. All of the people in this montage who had solutions and who demanded better did not look like me. It was funny because one of my co-anchors at the time, a white lady, and we were talking about it, and we decided to speak up about it. So they changed that montage. And I feel as if that's also been the biggest challenge for me, speaking out, knowing when to pick and choose my battles, and letting people know, even if they don't see it intentionally, what it does and the ramifications, the impacts it can have on people. Sometimes we don't often see that, and sometimes we don't use that voice. Sometimes I know I still to this day, and I say that's why it's also the biggest challenge, I'll let those moments pass and I'll be at home like, damn, why I ain't say nothing? So I find myself trying to do that now, more and more. Like I said, this is going to air on the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's death. This is also Mental Health Awareness Month. That's why we're kind of having this conversation as well. Again, we're in a barbershop where no conversations off limits. 6 people who all look like me. There are a lot of people who are watching this who don't look like us, who don't come from backgrounds that we come from. If there's one takeaway you all have for them when this story airs, what would that takeaway be? Why should they care?
For the same reason, human. Like this is the human experience, and and it is a beautiful thing to understand people that are different than you. There's beauty in that. It's power in that. And so I would just say, just continue to be willing to listen. Continue to be willing to learn, and to learn not on your terms. And so I think that's what I would say. Just continue to be open and understanding, and know that it's beautiful.
Well, mine is simple. The hard work begins after the protest ends. You can't show up, and I tell people this, because you're marching doesn't necessarily change the way the system has been built and designed. The hard work is to begin to influence and change policy, and to not say, I feel bad for you because you live in that scenario, because you don't have to live through what, people who are oppressed and marginalized have to live through, but to say, I'm gonna do my part beyond that. And it goes to, how we look at elections, how we look at how legislation is often written in a way by design that keeps certain people shut out of the Kansas City dream and the Missouri dream and the US dream. And until we begin to get people to understand that this conversation is deeper than just several incidents that occur, like this has been going on for decades. It's just that it's just being exposed more. But until you change the way the system is designed, we're going to continue to remain here. So that's, for me, is the hard work begins after the protesting ends.
Anybody else?
I think I would say, so I imagine for people not outside of the community hearing us talk about these things, it can be daunting, it can be discouraging, it could be scary, it can be traumatic, in whatever sense you want to use that word. But I would say, I would remind the folks that are hearing this, to remember that as they're having a reaction to us talking about these things and sort of lifting the lid on what it is to be a person of color, experiencing these things and living through these, to remember that this is, while they're battling with this now, this is, most of the time, this is our reality. And to get past, to get past that uncomfortable feeling, if they're truly wanting to be in a space where they're an ally. And I dislike that use ally, the word ally, for the exact reason that you talked about, because oftentimes it comes across as performative, even if there are good intentions behind it, because the deeper work is not done. So I would encourage folks that are listening to this, if it's uncomfortable for you, get past that uncomfortableness. And I'm not being brash or anything, but get past it so that you can do the work with us. Like, this is our reality. You can point to most kids within our community. They know what it's like to have to learn how to navigate being in a predominantly white space, and how they would navigate being in their community where they feel comfortable and safe. We've always had to do this. So if you're truly wanting to be in that space where you're an ally for us, get past this so that you can actually be that.
Hey, see, he said so much. It's perfect. W.E.B. Du Bois called it double consciousness. And I don't even think it's double anymore, because I'm African American. My dad's one of the first African Americans to integrate the U.S. Army in '54 as a drill sergeant. My mom is first generation Mexican American. Her parents were undocumented. So you're talking about mental trauma. I experienced the whole spectrum. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And then you have to understand it's this false narrative that we created these economic conditions, which is false. So I've been in public school my entire life. I didn't get a chance to go to a Pembroke Hill. I didn't get a chance to go to a Sumner Academy. I went to Washington High School. Then I went to the #1 university in the world, and we're in America, UCLA. I left in 2001 to enter the draft, came back and graduated in 2019. I've seen so many different groups of people and generations. My generation, we would never talk about this. When I went back to school to graduate in 2019, the world is changing. And to me, it looks like contractions of birth. The closer to the change, the crazier it gets and the more intensity you're gonna have. And you see it shifting and breaking. And this next generation, which I call the video game generation, they've been playing with different people their whole life. Online, black, white, brown, they've been playing their whole life. They don't see it that way. And they are very outspoken, and they are all about change, so it's divide in suburban white homes already. Educate yourself. Critical Race Theory is a great book. Delgado's the author. It talks about how racism has transformed and changed. The microaggressions, the dog whistles, the words you don't say that mean something else that you can say. And then start to look back in the 60s when public housing was built. In the middle of the inner city was so much economic boom. And then you had to be there. You couldn't have a black man there with you, or you couldn't live in public housing. And then when you did live in public housing, all of the jobs left to the suburbs. And that's never been changed. So maybe because I went through the school of Arthur Ashe, Jackie Robinson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, maybe my mind is just a little bit different. But you can't have an opinion until you first educate yourself. And for all the business people, it's a book called Good to Great. Read it and put the economic strategy on how to be successful and how to reverse engineer success, put it to social issues and reverse engineer it to how it happened. And then that's where you have us saying, hey, we would love to have economic opportunity. I would love to went to a school with computers. I didn't touch my first computer until I got to UCLA. The first time I written a paper was at UCLA. I would love to have that opportunity. Listen, be comfortable being uncomfortable, and realize that as a community, we're not saying, for me, I'm not saying we need help. I'm saying we need you to understand. Give us the resources. We help ourselves. We just want to be on the same level, playing field, and be out there. And I want my kid to grow up who is 6 and 11. I want them to grow up and be very comfortable saying, I can truly be anything I want. And because I do TV too, right? I do sports, Pac-12 and NBA TV. You can't, and people don't understand this, when you get to a certain point, you got to pick your battles. Because if you don't pick your battles, you get fired. I didn't care about getting fired, right? Because I understand. So you have to be you have to play chess when everybody else is just playing Monopoly. And that's not fair, but understand it, educate yourself, and the dialogue must continue, because at the end of the day, we are human. We have the same emotions. I never seen one mother cry differently for her son than another mother, regardless of race. And that's where we all come from.
Man, they about covered it all. I mean, they done about covered it all. But really, they about touched on every point, man. I really appreciate you guys allowing me to be a part of this dialogue, because a lot of times we don't truly get to express the side of law enforcement. And me being a black law enforcement officer, I got an opportunity to say some, just to put my input in, and you guys listen to me. One thing that I would want people to understand, that it's important to listen. And it's important, you guys, like you were saying, to understand. And when you listen with honesty, because a lot of the stuff that was going on around this year, I was explaining it to guys that I work with of another color, and they truly just didn't understand. So just, I was explaining to them, I want people to listen to this and understand that, listen with an open heart, listen with an open mind, and know that change is needed. And like Earl said, we're not begging. We just want the playing field to be level, and don't change the rules once we understand the game. So that would be it for me. Because like you said, your brothers have covered most of it.
I just got through reading this book, The Color of Law. It talked about how basically the government helped to kind of institute some of the segregation and some of the practices and some of the wealth inequalities you see right now with some of the FHAs and the New Deal. And it was so interesting. Matter of fact, I talked when I was on the phone the other day. I think I mentioned that to you, how open that was. I think, it's funny, Pastor, one of my favorite scriptures is from the book of Isaiah: do good, seek justice, correct oppression. And I feel like, heck, if we live our life like that, man, it'd be a whole better place. So that'll be my charge to folks who will be watching this when it's done. We a little bit past our time, and so we're going to get out of here. Unlimited Trends, thank you all for your time. We appreciate y'all, really, really we do. Pastor, you know what? Pastor, can you lead us out here in prayer?
I sure can.
My man.
Let's pray. Lord, we just thank you for this opportunity. We thank you for all these brothers and these sisters who are here, who are just sharing our hearts and just sharing our perspectives and ultimately sharing our lives. And we thank you for our stories. Like each and every person in here has a story. And God, with those stories, God, you've walked with us. You've ministered to us. And Father, we're able to live our lives and share our stories in a powerful way. And so, God, we just thank you. I pray for safety as we leave this place. And I pray that something was said today that ministers to someone's heart and transforms somebody's life and encourages someone. And I pray this in Jesus' name.